Hello and welcome to this CPD session based on the interrelated dimensions of music, created by Pete Whitmarsh from the Dorset Music Service. So, what are the interrelated dimensions of music? The interrelated dimensions of music are the key building blocks that musicians use to create, perform, and understand music. Each dimension focuses on a different aspect of how music works, and together they help us describe and analyse what we hear. If your school subscribes to Trianga, there are videos explaining each one of the interrelated dimensions of music. These videos can be found in the resource library. Our first dimension we are going to look at is pitch. The definition would be the high and low sounds that we hear. We would perhaps start by allowing children to listen to a piece of music and maybe ask them if they can identify where pitches are high or low. We could also play some singing games where you would sing and they would echo the singing pattern back, and you could vary your pitch as you are singing. Once the children are comfortable with singing and identifying the different pitch, then you could move on to playing melodies on keyboards or glockenspiels. I would start with only just one or two notes to begin with, and then expand until we could create maybe a scale or even a pentatonic scale of just using the 5 notes. Allow the children to explore the instrument and how pitch can change. Once you have got comfortable with this, the children can then perhaps start creating or composing their own piece of music using 2, 3, 4, 5 or a whole scale in order for them to use pitch. Our next dimension is rhythm, sometimes referred to as duration. The definition of rhythm are the long and short sounds within a rhythmic pattern. Not to be confused with something called pulse. Pulse is the heartbeat of a piece of music, a feeling that we can pick up and maybe tap along with, but that will always stay the same, a bit like a ticking clock. Rhythm can actually change. A good game to play with the children are clapping patterns. You perhaps already do this in your class. You would start by clapping a pattern and the children would have to listen and clap that pattern back. You could then invite the children to have a go at creating their own patterns, and everyone else would then clap their pattern back. Once people are used to how rhythm can change, you could then start looking at using something called rhythm grids. Again, if your school subscribes to Trianga, there is rhythm grid apps within the software. These are great to allow children to write their own rhythms, and you could actually link that up to your whiteboard, and other people in the class could have a go at clapping or playing on an instrument their own or somebody else's rhythm. Moving on from the rhythm grids, you then could perhaps start using a DAW. Within Trianga, you have UStudio, which is a digital audio workstation. This will allow you or the children to arrange already pre-recorded rhythmic loops. Children can explore and have fun with having multiple rhythms going at the same time, or just one rhythm at a time. Our next dimension is dynamics. Dynamics, the definition would be for loud and quiet changes of sound that we hear in a piece of music. I would start by listening to pieces of music and asking the children to identify, perhaps putting their hand up when they hear a loud part or a quiet section. For teaching ideas, listening for contrasts would be the best starting point. Once they have got used to identifying the difference in louds and quiets, you could then ask the children to move on to their instruments ready to play. Whilst they are playing their instruments, you could use a conducting game. Either yourself or select a leader to be at the front and to give a hand signal perhaps for when to play loud and when to play quiet. or when to sing loud and when to sing quiet. A very good hand signal would be simply showing your arms moving up if you want the children to play or sing louder, and moving your arms down if you wanted them to play quieter or sing quieter. Moving on from hand signals, you could then start looking at graphic scores. I will show you a graphic score on the next slide. They are an easy way for children to be able to start following a little bit of notation and a little bit of direction as to whether they need to think about their dynamics. Here is an example of a very simple graphic score. As you can see, there are 4 sections. You could ask the children to just focus on one of the boxes to begin with. Maybe vocalize it first before moving on to their instruments. As you could see in the top left-hand box, the blue circles are getting larger. To me, that would be an interpretation of starting with a quiet sound and then a medium and moving on to a larger, bigger sound. The box in the top right-hand corner has a wavy line with ups and downs. To me, I could interpret that with starting medium, getting louder, dropping back down, and then getting louder towards the end. The bottom left-hand box, just 3 simple lines. Again, the children could interpret that for maybe a quieter sound because it's less busy. And on the bottom right-hand side with all the stars, the children could interpret that with lots of busy sounds, which would automatically make us maybe be a little bit louder. The good thing about a graphic score is there are no wrong answers. It is completely interpretations for each and individual person. It is a really inclusive way to be able to look at dynamics and a little bit of a graphic score. Our next dimension is tempo. The definition for tempo would be the speed of the beat or the speed of the music. You could start by asking the children to try and find the pulse. Listen to a piece of music, see if they can march on the spot in time with the pulse. Let them explore and discuss whether it's a quick piece or a slow piece. Moving on, they could have a go at trying to guess the beats per minute. Give them a multiple choice of maybe a slow, a medium, and a fast BPM. Let them listen to that piece of music and ask them to decide what BPM they think it might be. Then moving on to performing at different tempos. Asking the children to sing their songs or play their music at different tempos. You could use flashcards, maybe with a hare or a tortoise. Ask the children what would that mean, and again using the graphic score. The graphic score that we saw on the last slide, the bottom boxes, if you remember, one of them had just 3 lines. That could perhaps be a slow, long sound with a slow tempo. And then the box with the stars on the right hand side. That would be a busy and maybe quick tempo piece of music. Again, it's interpretation for the children. No right or wrong answers. With tempo, they can perform their pieces of music at different speeds and understand perhaps a certain tempo for a certain mood of music. If we thought of a party piece of music, you might find it easier to use a quicker tempo. The next dimension is timbre. The definition for timbre is tone colour of sound, perhaps thinking of the different sounds and the different families of an orchestra. The brass instruments have a different colour sound to the percussion or the woodwind. A good teaching idea would be to start by letting the children explore various instruments for themselves. If you have a trolley with hand percussion instruments on, you might find that some of them have metally sounds or wooden sounds. Once you have explored the different sounds, the best thing would be to let the children listen to music and maybe identify. Moving on from that, they could then start thinking about different timbre within their class compositions with various instruments and various sounds. Perhaps one table could play wooden sounds, another table could play metal sounds on a glockenspiel or something like that. The children can then play around with the different timbres, and their music will become a little bit more interesting the more timbre they have. Our next dimension is texture. The definition for texture would be the layers of sound, or the thick parts and the thin parts of a song. A good starting point for teaching this idea would be to allow the children to listen to music and identify the textures. It could be a verse or a chorus. One might be a little bit thicker in texture and sound. Again, thinking of the graphic score that we've just been looking at. The box with the 3 lines would be a very thin texture. The box with all those stars filled up would be much busier and a thicker texture. Polyrhythms will create good texture. In the next slide, I will show you how polyrhythms could be used and how we could layer things up. Another game that you could play would be to have children sat on tables with different instruments, and they could start by playing one table at a time, and then the next table come in, and then the next group or the next table. Again, on those tables you might have different sounds, so different timbre, so they could be working on 2 things at once. Play around with texture. Let the children decide whether they want it to be busy or whether they want it to be a quieter or thinner section. As you can see, this slide is all about polyrhythms. Polyrhythm basically means many rhythms. This is a good way to start introducing the idea of texture. As you can see, I've based this slide on a pizza. There may be 4 groups. Each table in a classroom may be having different instruments. One table or one group could be my base, the next team would be my sauce, the next team my topping, and my last team would perhaps be the cheese that sprinkles over the top. Each one of them could come up with a different phrase. As you can see here, my base, they would be saying crispy crunchy pizza base. And the sauce and the topping and the cheese all have different phrases. I would always start using our voice first, asking the children to just vocalize or say their patterns one at a time. Start with one team saying their phrase and then bringing in another team and then another team and another team until all 4 teams. But don't forget, texture can work both ways. We could build up, but we could also strip it back to again just 1 or 2 teams saying their phrase. Once the children have got good just using their voice, you could then start using some untuned percussion. Or, if the children are getting really good at their music making, we could start using different timbre. We could have untuned percussion. We could have a pentatonic scale being played maybe on a glockenspiel. If they're not quite ready for a pentatonic scale, then you could maybe just use 2 different notes that they could play. Again, a great opportunity to discuss many different areas. You could discuss texture, timbre, rhythm. You could even bring in dynamics. All of the different dimensions that we've spoken about so far in tonight's CPD. Our final dimension is structure. The definition for structure would be how music is organized. A good starting point for discussing structure with children would be to let them listen and identify to different parts of a song. You're probably quite familiar with verses and chorus. Each one of those would be a different part, sometimes referred to as the A section or the B section. This could then lead them onto their own class compositions or individual compositions. Particularly useful if there is a contrast in each of the different parts. For example, the A section might be a calm part, whereas the B section may be a little bit more uplifting and a bit more of a celebration. If your children are using UStudio, the digital audio workstation part of Trianga, it is very good to be able to identify the difference in those structures. The A section, a B section, and then the A section might return again just to finish the piece of music off. Perhaps the children could listen to more classical music to identify more complex structures. Often classical pieces of music will have A, B, maybe even A, B, A, C, and A returning section again. Allow the children to experiment how they want to structure their own composition. Finally, how do all the dimensions come together? Well, in all pieces of music we listen to, these dimensions of music will overlap to create the overall sounds we hear. They can be taught individually, but will make more sense if discussed and developed together as you explore any piece of music. If we take the slide that I shared with you earlier with the polyrhythms, within that slide and within that exercise, we could cover almost all of the interrelated dimensions of music. This is something that Ofsted would be expecting. It is something that you should be revisiting. You could be exploring a brand new piece of music and ask the children whether they can identify some of those interrelated dimensions of music. You can develop one, but also refer back to other dimensions that you've discussed in previous weeks. So then the children are becoming aware of all of the different dimensions of music. I hope you have lots of fun in creating your music and discussing these dimensions of music. Thank you very much for joining me on this CPD session, and I look forward to seeing you again at further and future CPD sessions. Thank you very much.